A White Hearth Warming by Chris. It was by all accounts a beautiful day. The sun shone brightly, the grass was green and springy under hoof, and the temperature was just brisk enough that ponies could justify putting on their winter coats, but not so cold that they couldn't leave them behind at home if they decided that those clothes weren't quite as fetching as they'd imagined when they bought them. It was the sort of day about which no reasonable pony could complain. "Oh, sweet Celestia, this weather is the worst," cried Sunset Shimmer, smacking a hoof against the windowsill as she glared out at the outside world. "I'm right here, you know," said Princess Celestia, a smile curling the corners of her lips. She joined Sunset at the window, looking out upon the city of Canterlot in all its sprawling glory. "There's no need for such dramatics, I'm sure." Sunset was not mollified. "But look, there's no snow, and hearthwarming is tomorrow. How are we supposed to have a hearthwarming with no snow?" Celestia put a wing over Sunset's back, guiding her gently away from the window and toward the center of the castle chamber. "I have seen hundreds of hearthwarmings, my dear student, and I can assure you that a lack of snow has never once caused the holiday to be canceled. In fact, in some of the southern parts of Equestria, it almost never snows for hearthwarming. In ponies still, I don't care what they do in the south. There's supposed to be snow on the ground at hearthwarming. There's always snow." Celestia's face became more neutral, and she lifted her wing. Sunset clamped her mouth shut, aware that the princess was no longer humoring her. "Sunset, what 3 words have I asked you to stop using in my presence?" A half-hearted mumble was her only answer. "Sunset, I don't care. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I just..." Sunset looked down, frowning at the carpet. "I like the snow, and it should snow on hearthwarming." She scuffed a hoof. "It always snows for hearthwarming." Celestia smiled again. "Perhaps it always has in your lifetime, but I can assure you that this will not be the first time I've seen the spires of Canterlot bare for the holidays. And speaking from experience," she leaned close and looked at Sunset with a twinkle in her eyes, "those years were no less special to me." Sunset nodded weakly. "Okay," she said, her voice still a bit too weak for her own liking. Celestia nodded back, then straightened and walked to the door. "I have business to attend to, but I would very much like to see you again this evening. Until then..." Rather than speak and risk her voice betraying her again, Sunset nodded one more time, and Celestia opened the door. Pausing as she exited, the princess looked back at her student. Already, Sunset noted, her face bore that opaque mask which she invariably wore in public. It was the only expression of hers which most ponies had ever known, but Sunset had seen what lay behind it often enough in the last year to recognize the effect. Celestia spoke. "Oh, and Sunset, until then, perhaps you might consider reflecting on the history of hearthwarming." A knowing grin peeked through the mask, just for a second. "I think you'll find your concerns put at ease soon enough." With that, she closed the door gently. Reflecting on the history of hearthwarming might have seemed to most ponies like a kindly way of brushing someone off, but Sunset Shimmer wasn't most ponies. She'd been the princess's prize student for almost a year now, and she knew a test when she saw one. So the passage of an hour saw her hunched over a heavy oak table near the back of the royal library, her head buried deep in the history books, looking for some clue as to what Celestia might have meant. Page after page flew by as she muttered to herself, trying to find something that would shed light on the princess's cryptic phrasing. After all, when had she ever not been cryptic? "You'll find your concerns put at ease," she muttered to herself, rolling the words over in her mind. With a shake of her head, she dove back into her reading. She wormed her way through the book as fast as comprehension allowed until, "Aha!" she cried triumphantly, leaping up on the table and dramatically planting a hoof on an illustration of the 3 tribes fleeing their homelands. At last she knew Shh! Shushed the matronly librarian. Sunset bristled, but she'd long since learned not to doubt the resolve of the library's dry, dusty, and unfailingly cranky sentinels. Or at least, not to doubt their ability to get her in trouble with Celestia. She got down off the table and took her seat quietly. "Ah!" she whispered, gently setting her hoof on an illustration of the 3 tribes fleeing their homelands. At last she knew exactly what she needed to do. Celestia loomed over Sunset Shimmer. Normally she would lower her neck to look Sunset in the eye when they talked, but now she stood tall, staring sternly down, her disappointment plain to see. Sunset Shimmer glared back at her, standing her ground as she tried to meet that disappointment with her own defiance. After a tense moment, Celestia sighed and took a seat. Sunset remained standing. "Sunset," Celestia said, rubbing the base of her horn with a hoof, "would you care to tell me why I'm returning from court to find that you've been restricted to my chamber for your own good?" "You already asked the guards at the door," Sunset said, unable to keep the pout from her voice as she continued to glare. "Why don't you tell me what he said?" Celestia sighed again. She didn't speak right away, but after a few minutes, she answered. "He told me you've been spending the afternoon running around the castle insulting every pony you've met. He told me you've been rushing about, seemingly bent on being as unpleasant as possible to as many ponies as you can. He told me he literally followed a path of crying fillies and colts to find you, and that he brought you here as much for your own safety as for the sanity of every pony in the castle." She pursed her lips. "He also told me that you said to him, and I'm quoting, that you should enjoy your power trip while you can, because when I become princess, I'm going to throw you out on the street like the dirty mule you are." Sunset didn't flinch. "I don't care if it is rude. Mules are dirty." "What 3 words have I don't care," Sunset cried. "I don't care, Celestia. I did exactly what you said, and what happened? I got picked up by the scruff of my neck and sent to the teacher's room like a little foal. What was this supposed to teach me, Celestia? Huh? What?" Celestia shook her head, and suddenly Sunset thought she looked very old. "Sunset, have I ever given you a single lesson which could be solved with cruelty?" She looked her student in the eye. "Tell me first, what do you think I was trying to teach you?" "You said I should study hearth warming so I could fix the stupid weather," Sunset said. Her eyes started to water, but she soldiered on. "You said if I thought about it, I'd figure out how to make everything better, and I did." She sniffed. "I figured it out, I mean. I read in the books about how ponies back before the founding were angry and mean to each other, and that made the Wendigos come and cover everything in ice. But even though I tried to make every pony really mad, they never came." A bit of iron returned to her voice as she added, "And then your stupid guard locked me in here." Celestia stood and walked to the window. "Sunset," she began, peeking between the drawn curtains and peering outside. "Do you really think that I would want you to spread anger and sadness across this city? Do you truly believe that that is what I intended you to learn?" Sunset grimaced. "I did what you wanted to, without regards for others," Celestia finished for her. "If you had studied the meaning of the first hearth warming, and not just its events, you would have learned something rather different. You would have learned, just as Smart Cookie, Private Pansy, and Clover the Clever did, that true power doesn't come from blustery bravado, or riding roughshod over any pony who is in your way. True power comes from a kinder, more beautiful place." Turning to face her student, she said, "Come here, Sunset, and look out over Canterlot." Cringing, Sunset trotted over to the window and pushed aside the curtains. Then she gasped. "It can't be. It's..." Her voice caught, but finally she whispered, "It's snowing." Outside, teams of Pegasi pushed cloud after cloud into position, forming a wispy gray ceiling over the city. As they were moved into place, other teams began coaxing snow out of them. Only a few flurries, but more all the time. Already the spires of Canterlot were dusted with white. "It won't be much, just a half-inch or so. Still, it seems we'll have a white hearth swarming after all," Celestia observed. Sunset gaped. "Did you do this?" When Celestia nodded, she broke out into a grin which spread nearly ear to ear. "You did it! You ordered all those—" "I asked them, Sunset," Celestia gently interrupted. She gestured to the window. "Every pony out there is a volunteer, working together to bring a bit of snow to Canterlot, not just for you, but for all the ponies in this city who wished for a white hearth swarming." Celestia wrapped her wing around Sunset. "This is the lesson I wanted you to learn. That when ponies work together in friendship and harmony, there's nothing they cannot do." Sunset snuggled against the princess, never taking her eyes off the window. "So, if I act nice, ponies will do what I want without me having to order them around?" Celestia opened her mouth, then closed it again. After a long moment, she smiled. "I suppose that's close enough for now." Sunset frowned, even as her eyes remained full of wonder. "I don't want to be close enough," she said, still watching the flurries fall. "I know you don't," Celestia agreed, "and I believe this is a lesson you will fully grasp in time. Perhaps not this very moment, but I am certain there will come a day when you look back to this evening and understand with perfect clarity." She gazed out at the window with Sunset. "You still have much to learn, my dear student, but I have no doubt that you will go on to do great things one day." Together, the two of them watched the snow fall. It was, by all accounts, a beautiful night. The moon glowed gently. The snow was clean and white upon the rooftops, and the temperature was just brisk enough for ponies to feel properly grateful to be sitting inside by roaring fires, without being so cold that they'd actually feel concerned about the prospect of having to make a trip to the shed to get more wood. It was the sort of night about which no reasonable pony could possibly complain. "Happy hearth-warming, my dear student," murmured Princess Celestia. She carefully tucked a blanket around Sunset Shimmer, who was curled up next to her by the fire. Sunset didn't reply. She was already fast asleep.